Um, Guys, do you want to see a picture of my baby?
Seems like a rhetorical question.
Oh, you're right. I do want to see it, but you're right.
I know I'm working with two men because one, no one asks me questions about my baby, and two, no one wants to see pictures of my baby. And I'm like, look at a fucking picture of my baby.
I'll see a picture of your baby. Wow.
Looks like a baby.
What an enthusiastic.
It's a baby. Welcome to No Clear Answers, where we explore the common challenges all humans, creators, and leaders face and break down preconceived notions of common self-help ideas. We are your hosts. I'm Rikki Goldenberg.
I'm Justin Mulvaney.
And I'm Dr. Corey Wilkes.
Friends, we're running an experimental episode today. We're trying something a little different. Let us know if you like it, love it, hate it. You're going to love it. And also, while we're on that, first of all, thank you all for listening. If you like the show, we could probably afford to do this more often, but we like to just have a good time and play it loose. But if you like the show, consider rating it on your favorite rating platform. It helps people find it and search it. Give us that perfect 5-star review. And also, did you know, I was too lazy to pull up the exact stats, but the top 2 ways people find podcasts is they hear about them on different podcasts and their friends recommend them to them. And so if you've got a favorite episode of No Clear Answers and you've got a friend who you think would benefit from it, do consider sending them that episode, spreading the word. Give them the gift, and it would also mean a lot to your lovely hosts, Rikki, Corey, and Justin.
I do like to imagine that I'm not just talking into the void, and that instead someone is really enjoying listening to this or hate listening. I'm cool with that too. I like that as well.
I prefer not hate listening, but
like I would like it if you got a little angry. Why not?
What was the recent milestone we hit? Because I talked about it on social media.
It was 1,000 downloads. By the way, we've already blown past it. We're at like 1,080 now. We're chugging. Yeah. It was 1,000 downloads and then 666 downloads in the United States. The devil visited us for a second time because a prior time I logged in and we had 666 downloads. So finding the devil everywhere with No Clear Answers.
Next stop, 10K, then 100K, then 1 million.
And then 1 billion.
Yes.
So today, niche new topic. We'll see how wide we go with it, but we wanted to take a moment to talk about something that we all have played with a lot in our careers and as coaches, which is personality assessments, diagnostic tools. This is a big thing in the coaching space. And today we want to speak to one very specific tool, which is what's called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, which is a very common personality assessment. So I want to just set the scene broadly about personality assessments, which is why we use them as coaches, why we care about them, why maybe you would care about them, and how some lenses we can use them, right? Why we care about them. I think in the coaching space, there's a huge amount of time and energy that has gone to inventing the perfect diagnostic process and tools to help somebody understand their strengths and weaknesses and blind spots, right? And so we all as coaches have played with some of these things. We'll sometimes deploy them for our clients. I've tested them wildly on myself. I've done like all of them. Different tools, right, have more of a scientific basis, and others have sometimes been developed purely in industry for utilitarian purposes, right? So different places have their in-house things that may or may not have some research behind them. And let's be honest, very similar to astrology, they're also kind of fun. So there's a component of all of these that are scientifically validated, usefulness, and also, hey, it's just kind of fun to like take this quiz and then have something be like, oh, some of them actually have no more depth to them than basically going, you're a Hufflepuff. And you go, oh, I'm a Hufflepuff. but we use them a lot. So in this series, we want to take the chance to, based on our experience with these things, talk about what are some of the different types, what we like about them, what we don't like about them. And today we're going to talk about a very specific popular type, once again, called the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. So to give a little background on Myers-Briggs, it's an introspective, self-reporting questionnaire that at the end, you get 4 letters. And those letters, all in a row, represent where you live on the spectrum of 2 things. So you can either be extroverted or introverted, an E or an I. You can be, let's see if I can get these all, intuitive or sensing, an N or an S. You could be thinking or feeling, a T or an F. And then you can be perceiving or judging, perceptive or judging, a P or a J. Yes, Rikki.
Can I add some context too? Because a lot of those words have, we have our own preconceived notions of what that means, right? So I think it's also helpful to recognize, I have this written down because I was rereading the New York Times article about Myers-Briggs, which I'll talk about. So sensing versus intuition is how you perceive the world. And then thinking versus feeling is how you make decisions. And judging versus perceiving is how you deal with the outside world. Judging means you're more structured, and perceiving means you're more adaptable and like flexible. So the words themselves, I think that's why I just need to jump in and share that, because the words themselves, they mean different things to me. But when I explain and read about how I'm supposed to think about them with regards to the letters, it always helps me. So just some additional context on those names.
Thank you, Rikki. So before we dive all the way in, what I want to hear from everyone is, what are your experiences with the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator? Personal experiences. I believe we all know our types and have had some touch points. So let's just actually start the conversation broadly with that.
So as part of my coaching certification, when I went through it, we had to do like the official one. Like the things called like the MBTI step 2 or some shit. So I have like official, in air quotes, results. I mean, I guess they're not even in air quotes, like they're actually official results. So I am an ENTJ, and which aligns with like the free ones I took like in fucking high school and shit. Like I've basically always been an ENTJ. So extroversion, intuition, thinking, judging. I don't disagree with that, but for example, I'll save that for my spiciness. I'm an ENTJ, and we'll start there. Go ahead, Rikki.
Full disclosure, if you are listening to this and you're like, what am I? There's actually a really fun, simple, free assessment. I think it's called 16 Personalities, and you can take it and it's free. I don't know if it's as official as the MBTI that Corey is referencing.
I think hardcore MBTI people would say it's not.
Probably not, right?
It's more fun though. I would recommend.
I think it also tells you what celebrity you're like. It's like a little bit more
I think
fun.
It does a pretty good job, honestly.
Oh, I love that. I have also had to take the MBTI. Personally, I had to take it when I worked for a big name consulting firm. It was required as part of the onboarding experience. And from then on, every future project that we joined, you were supposed to introduce yourself along with your Myers-Briggs. It was like, hi, I'm Rikki and I'm da-da-da-da. So I had to do that. I have a lot of feelings on that. But mine is INFJ. So not too far from Corey. And an introvert, intuitive, feeling, judging. And I also think it's important to note, specifically for myself, is that I'm really close to the center on all of those. Like almost right at the line for every single one. Like none of them are really strong, which I always think was really interesting. I was like, I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I remember knowing that.
Yeah, great. I first was introduced to MBTI. I also took the official, like regulated.
We all took the official one.
In
I love it.
my freshman year of college, when I went undeclared out of my major
Oh my
at
gosh.
RIT, and it was in the same class I talked about in our
This
values
class
episode.
is
If you've
great.
been, yeah, they're like, oh my God, you poor lost souls. You know nothing about yourself or the world because you're undeclared. They made us take the MBTI, and I initially typed. So here's one thing we'll get into this. When I was introduced to MBTI, I was told you have your type; it never changes. And that day, I typed as an INTJ. Yeah, Rikki even made a face. That doesn't feel like who I am now at all. Which I was very close to the line on the EI as well, which I still kind of do, but I type more E now. These days, what feels more accurate, it's actually been years since I've taken it, but it still feels accurate, is I'm an ENFJ, which I think is more right, which you all may hear that and go, I have no idea what those letters mean. I'll talk about why that correlates to why I don't like this as a personality indicator. But before we go there, I'm actually really wanting, Rikki, you have a lot of strong feelings about Myers-Briggs. You've brought them up before, and you have this New York Times article, which you've refreshed yourself on. I want to briefly give you the floor to set some of the context, because I think this is where some of this conversation came from, which is around that New York Times article and your specific feelings from it around the MBTI. So floor is yours. Can you tell us a bit more about the article, what it said?
I would love to. So Myers-Briggs, full disclosure, I think it's important. I think all three of us call a little bullshit on this in general, but
For sure.
okay, great. I was
Not
like,
a
I think
fan.
everybody, we can, that being said, I do think there's elements of it that are helpful and informative. We can get into that. This is not like,
We'll
never do it.
Talk
Like,
about
this
that
is useless.
some, but I want to start
100%.
here.
But for Myers-Briggs, I think the thing that I am still often surprised by that a lot of people don't know is Myers-Briggs, it's just a mother-daughter team. Like, they literally just made it up. There's very little science and data that was created in it. Now, granted, the mother happens to have been a fantastic marketer. So once they did have the test, they started testing it and getting more information and data. So it's like, yeah, maybe over time it got better. But ultimately, it was created like on a whim with no information and no science or data behind it. And
I want to briefly give them, it was based on some archetypes that Jung talked about. So Carl Jung, the famous psychologist, but they both treated it differently.
They came up with the questions themselves. Like,
yeah, they both invented the survey, and those theories of his were theories and not meant to be treated as dualities. They took it to a very different place than Jung.
Yes. And they also, one of the reasons why they did it was because they had felt that previously personality tests included like a positive and a negative. And so part of the reason why this was created the way that it is the idea that they're both positives. That where you sit along the spectrum, it's not like one is better than the other. It's in fact where you sit in the spectrum, both are positive. And so ultimately, that really threw me for a loop. For a long time, I thought MBTI was created in more of a scientific setting. And when I realized that it's just like a mother-daughter team that happened to be fantastic marketers and got into like a lot of systems, and then corporations sort of adopted it and kept using it. And you're like, oh, this is bullshit. They just happen to like cover the whole area. And there's been a lot of complaints. There was a documentary made a few years ago that was about personality tests and how they're actually really dangerous, and they highlight like unconscious bias, and there's not a lot of inclusivity. Myers-Briggs takes a lot of ownership around that they actually made a big effort for it to be inclusive, but it's still created by this mother-daughter team with like very little information that came into it, and it's suddenly used as like the metric to explain who you are, which I think is crazy. So thank you.
Thanks, Rikki. So yeah, I think the things to highlight about the type in general is it's broadly viewed as pseudoscientific, not scientific. Now, in our discussion of personality assessments in general, not very many of them are truly scientifically validated. In fact, the only one I really know of is one that's called the Big Five. And even though some aren't scientifically validated, they do have some usefulness to them. So where I want to start to give it a fair shot, because we all have our issues with Myers-Briggs, is what do we actually like about it, or our exposure to Myers-Briggs? I'm reminded of back in the presidential debates between Hillary and Trump, when the moderator said, can you just say one nice thing about each other? Can we just say one nice thing about the MBTI here?
I can try.
He's not even, he's like, maybe.
He's going to try. He's going to try.
So here's my thing. I think that personality tests, just like, so you're talking about like Jungian archetypes and how, you know, ain't nobody going to say that Jung is scientifically validated, but it gives us language and it gives us schemas to kind of, or mental heuristics, mental models to wrap our heads around, right? So I think that whether you're talking about Jungian archetypes or personality types, or I'm an ENTJ, or this is my Enneagram or Enneagram, however the fuck you pronounce it, or this is my horoscope, or this is what my tarot said, it gives you language and it gives you mental models to help make sense of the world as a starting point. Now, it becomes problematic when you say, oh, this is scientifically validated and I should root all of my decisions in this thing, or I should look at the world exclusively through this lens, then you're fucked. But if you see it as a starting point, as a way to have shared language and shared conceptualizations to work off of, it can be useful. That's as far as I can stretch it.
Corey got about 60% of the way to a nice thing.
Yeah.
I'm nauseous now, but yes, go ahead.
Yeah. He hates it.
Rikki, can you say any nice things about Myers-Briggs?
I think, similar to Corey, listen, I think they're a little fun. You know, there's like, I think if you hold them lightly, it can be enjoyable to fill out a quiz and have it tell you a little bit about yourself based on what you've shared, right? It's not like horoscopes are in their own worlds, because literally it's like a pipe dream. You're like, I was born on this day and therefore I am this kind of person. At least with Myers-Briggs, I answer some questions. It kind of gives me an info. I get to share it a little bit. I do think there's something fun there. And I also think that if you hold it lightly, it can be slightly informative. Like I was talking about this morning with Greg, that I was like, you know, the fancy consulting firm I worked for, when we all had to take it, I was like, I still remember that there's a woman who I love working with, but she could be difficult. And I remember seeing her Myers-Briggs and her specifically, she's going to like know who she is because when I say this, but this is fine. Her E, she literally is off the chart. She's so extroverted that she's off the, they had to make a new category for her on how extroverted she was. And so that's an example where that level of extreme was actually really helpful and informative for both her and for the team and how we work together. And it didn't have to be, this is who she is all the time, but it helped her understand when could this be helpful, when could it be hurtful. So I think that if you hold it lightly and you let it be a little fun and a little informative, then it can be fantastic. It is not a catch-all for like actual legitimate introspection and self-awareness and taking an insight and referencing and recognizing that we change as human beings and adapt over time. But fun little quiz that tells me that I'm like Beyonce. I'll take it. I think that's pretty nice.
I noticed that both of you had things that you liked about personality assessments, not as much Myers-Briggs. So,
oh no,
I'm going to give similar, like what I like about the assessments in general, and then specifically some credit that I'm going to try and give some specific credit to Myers-Briggs for something. Try being the key word there. Yeah, all around in my coaching, even unscientifically validated personality assessments, I like them. I like to think of them as frames, like introspective frames. They are the opportunity to put in some data, have something synthesize it into a mirror for you, and then reflect on your experience back around it. And the questions, I don't use so many before, but early on, I would have my clients take a number of different assessments. And for each one, reflect back what feels true, what feels untrue. And really a big one is, what do I really not want to be true?
Yeah, that's my favorite question.
Confronting the edges that it's poking back at me. And so even for things like MBTI, which I have a whole host of reasons why I don't like it as much, playing that game with it and using that as a mirror back to yourself when you may not be in as much as a feedback-rich environment can be a real good way of getting some solo feedback, and you can do some self-inquiry. Again, there are ways we go wrong with it. We'll get into that. But that's what I like. Things I specifically like about MBTI, if I were to give it credit, one, this is more general, but I do think it's if you've only been exposed to MBTI and not other personality assessments, I do think it's a good like beginner assessment. It was kind of the first assessment I was exposed to. It introduces a lot of like interesting concept and language and models, like you said, Corey, between introversion and extroversion and intuition and feeling and things like that, even if their language doesn't point to exactly what we think those terms mean. Okay, I'm getting into less like now.
You just talked yourself out of it.
And I do, the one thing on the official assessments, I do like that there's a scale rating to it. Now, a lot of assessments do this, but for me, it was really informative when I first took it, even though it typed me as an I and I'm more of an E, to see how close to the middle I was. And so there's some insights to be gleaned in it when it shows you're really close between it or you're like off the charts in a direction. That can be something that's really helpful about this type indicator specifically, even if a lot of other type indicators do have that. Okay, let's go right for it. What don't we like about MBTI? And I want to separate this from the question of how we misuse personality assessments in general. I think we'll explore that afterwards or potentially in a part 2 conversation. So before we go to any general conversation, like really MBTI, what don't we like about it?
It's really hard for me to specify MBTI because the things that I have issues with it are the same things largely I have issues with the majority of personality tests. They're just the most popular one that most people are familiar with because it's so easy to like take an online quiz. But trying to keep it specific. The biggest issue I have is what is called the Barnum effect. So the Barnum effect, like P.T. Barnum, like Barnum and Bailey, like circus shit, I think is where it comes from. I could be wrong. But Barnum effect is basically, if you say something vaguely enough, people will take it to be applied to themselves. Okay. So for example, reading directly from my official MBTI Step 2 report, between thinking and feeling, thinking says you make decisions using logical analysis to achieve objectivity. Of course, I love Vulcan shit. Of course, I love logic. But if it had said instead feeling, it says you make decisions using person-centered values to achieve harmony. Also, very much yes, I'm a huge proponent of core value work. Every decision I make, though logical, is logical to the end of aligning my life and business with my core value of freedom, right? So no matter what the fuck my report would have said, I would have shoehorned myself, my identity, my experiences into that terminology, right? Or for example, ENTJs like to go deep and they can focus on one task or subject for a while, even obsessively at times. That's not from my report. That's from a Scorpio horoscope. ENTJs are loyal, smart, shrewd, and stoic. They stand by their beliefs and they don't crave anyone else's approval. That's also from a fucking Scorpio horoscope from Cosmo. They could just as easily have been in an official fucking report and I would have been like, oh my God, girl, yes. Like, that's so me. It's like, it's all bullshit. It's like if you come to me as a fucking fortune teller and I say, oh, it seems like you're really struggling with a decision right now. Who the fuck isn't at any goddamn point in their fucking life struggling with some kind of decision on a long enough timeline? It's that kind of shit. That's my issue with Myers-Briggs specifically and damn near every personality assessment period that there is.
I want to chime in, Rikki. When you said this before, the way they talk about how you make decisions, is it logical or feeling? I want to highlight what Corey said, which is we have a lot more science now on how you make decisions. And to claim that you make decisions via thinking is the science literally says that it's impossible. We make decisions, as Corey said, always based on emotions and values and the others layers, and the logic just comes in to justify it. And so even like there's a whole letter of Myers-Briggs now, which the science is like it's bull. That's literally not how decision making works. So there's one part of me where I don't like it, but Rikki, where do you gotta, what grinds your gears about the Myers-Briggs?
Okay, one is just in the language around it. Like the fact that when you list all of the letters don't actually make sense, that you need to have that additional layer of information to even understand it, makes it really difficult for me. 2, I don't think it's quite robust. It's not really a 360 experience, right? It's only on these 4 different facets and frames. And also it's all self-reported. Right? Like it's self-reported. I'm not. And then similarly to what Corey was describing, the other thing that I think is an issue here is that because it's on a spectrum and they're both technically positive, you're always going to be able to see yourself in it. And it actually doesn't give you anything to work with, right? It doesn't, it's just a moment in time that it's capturing it. It's not telling me who I am and who I can be and where I can grow. Right? It's why it's basically a fucking horoscope. I can always find myself. I can always find things that I argue with it. I think ultimately, overall with personality, so I'll go back to, so that's my issues with MBTI, which is all of that. And then there's this other component with all these things, which is like, none of them are real. You know, they all basically are horoscopes. And what that creates is that there's this tension that we all feel, which is that we want to see ourselves, we want to be known, and yet we also want to be mysterious. So when I read a horoscope, I'm going to go with horoscopes and I read it, there's going to be the things that prickle for me that I'm like, oh yeah, that's so me. Especially if I'm into horoscopes. I'm like, oh my God, that's so me, right? Whereas if I'm being more cynical that day, or if I want to be like, you don't fucking know me just because you call me a Virgo, I'm more than just a Virgo, I'm going to pull out the things that don't correlate with me in that time, in that day. And so I think ultimately with all these personality tests, it doesn't allow for that tension between am I known and am I unknown, and how I perceive myself now and where I can be going. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm going to go a little broad and then narrow it down to MBTI. I've experimented with so many of these that there are kind of 3 primary ways that I grade it, like grade a personality assessment. One is scientifically valid. Does the science actually validate it? And again, as far as I know, there's only one that wins that, which is the Big 5. Only one. Everything else doesn't have it. But I think there are other ones that are still useful, and there's 2 other grades that I give it. One is literally how useful is it? How can I get real returns from deploying it in my day-to-day? Which is, can I deploy it when I think about myself? And also a big one is deploy it interrelationally, right? And then the third one is what Rikki said is, does this actually implicit in the personality assessment, does it help me understand how I can develop myself? Or is it just giving me a label? So when I run Myers-Briggs through these grades for me, is it scientifically valid? No, we've already said that. Not scientifically validated. Let's go to the third one, which Rikki said. Does it implicitly in it say, hey, here's how you can grow and develop? No, Myers-Briggs is saying, here's your box. Here's the box that you're in. Doesn't really give me much of what to do with it. I'm sure there's some thinkers who do, but it's not really built into it. And then when I go, is it useful? Well, I compare it to some other things. Is it personally useful for me? I go, well, I guess when I first get it and I can introspect on it, there's some use there. But as I'm moving through the day, I have these 4 letters that all mean different things that interact in different ways. the letters themselves, the amount of education it takes me to really understand what these letters mean. Like, Rikki, you went to the top and described, hey, these words don't mean what you immediately associate them with meaning. And then the other thing I go with is, okay, there's 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. There's 16 permutations of this. When I meet somebody else, one, if I don't know them, how quickly can I potentially grok their type? With MBTI, at least for me, it's impossible unless they tell me their type. And then once I know their type, how helpful is it? And it's not for me. It's not helpful at all. And so MBTI for me, aside from, and this is where it literally to me feels horoscope, from when somebody first describes your horoscope type and you go, oh, that does sound like me. That doesn't sound like me. I don't want that to be me. Has almost no use beyond that. Whereas a big 5 is scientifically valid. When I look at usefulness, for me, and we could talk about this later in another one, DISC is really useful. I feel like I can see those tendencies in the day, and I can meet somebody and pretty quickly see how they fit into one of the 4 buckets of DISC. And then let myself get woo-woo. There's Enneagram, which is less scientifically validated, but in it has an implicit, hey, if this type feels like it identifies with you, here's the developmental trajectory for you. Whereas Myers-Briggs for me fails on all 3. Fail. Not a big fan of Myers-Briggs. So we know we don't like MBTI. Let's go just a bit broader into the conversation, and I'll make a note here. There's a chance I'm going to think I'd take us into some broader things. This may be a 2-parter episode. We'll see what we want to do, but I say let's have the full conversation here. There's 2 more questions I want to explore. Well, let's go with the first one, which is, where in general do people make mistakes with personality assessments? I just said some of it, but Corey, this is a chance for you to go wider. Rikki, this is a chance for us to go wider. Where in general do we make mistakes?
So one thing that is top of mind is even just like the whole introvert extrovert conversation, right? Because that's usually like one of the biggest personality things that people ascribe to themselves. It can be a helpful descriptor of like trying to describe yourself, but then you quickly get into shoehorning your identity into that. Oh, I am an introvert, and that's it. The reality is there's a third term that most people don't know, which is ambivert.
Mm-hmm.
An ambivert basically says sometimes you can be extroverted, sometimes you can be introverted. Because a lot of times the whole introvert extrovert conversation revolves around like how you define it or identify with it is kind of, where do you get your energy? Like what depletes your battery versus recharges it, right? So I'll use myself as an example. Because again, I'm the E in ENTJ. I'm apparently extroverted. The thing is, anybody, if you've ever watched any fucking interview I've ever done or this podcast or you listen to something, you're only ever seeing me in extroverted mode. You do not see me in introverted mode where I'm just sitting on the couch in my pajamas and I don't want to fucking talk to people, right? I love, here's how I go. When there's a party coming up or some gathering, I say yes a month out or a couple weeks out. I'm excited. And then the closer I get to it, the more I fucking dread it. Cause I'm like, God, I don't want to go and be around people. It's going to be draining. I got to like, make sure I don't like let too much of my fucked up humor come out unless I'm with like the 3 people I know who really get it, all that kind of shit. But then when I go, I'm fully fucking on. It's great. It's wonderful. And then afterward, I'm like, damn, I'm really glad I went, but I need a couple weeks away from the fucking crowd. Right. I am much more ambiverted, even though anybody will internet wise will only ever see me in an extroverted mode. Okay. But if you saw me on a day-to-day basis, you might think, well, fuck, Corey's pretty introverted. I can just turn it on and off. Right. Ambiverted. That holds true for especially with the Myers-Briggs. That holds true for all these. Like this whole idea of like, we contain multitudes, right? No single thing is ever going to adequately define you. Whether it is, because like I've done other things, right? So like my Enneagram or whatever is like, what is it, 5, I think, whatever the fuck that means. So like that, maybe that tells you something else, but that doesn't tell you everything about me. That tells you very little about me, right? Scorpio, potentially Gryffindor, potentially like all these other, it doesn't fucking matter. Like none of, like it is all equally helpful and equally unhelpful, depending on how you use it. But the reality is you are much too multifaceted for any singular assessment to adequately encompass everything that you are. And when you forget that, you shoehorn your identity and yourself and your complexity into this overly simplistic mental model that is a disservice to you.
Beautiful. I want to throw this out. If you're listening right now and you're like, I think Myers-Briggs is the best, I think you're wrong, I think it's super useful, and here's how, reach out. I want to know personally. Like, there are these other assessments that, like Corey said, I don't love any of them from a blanket standpoint, but some of them I think can be really useful when used as very specific tools. Hey, I think DISC is a great interrelational hammer for generating some quick interrelational understanding. I think Enneagram is a really great personal reflection tool for charting, hey, here's some real core area chances for me to develop and some patterns that I can easily fall into. For me, I just don't see it with Myers-Briggs. Nobody yet has spoken to me in a way where it's like, here's the screwdriver that Myers-Briggs is really well developed for.
Even as we were talking, like listing off what our 4 letters are, and I was writing them down, I had this moment that I was like, this doesn't fucking tell me anything. Like, this doesn't change how I communicate with you. It doesn't change how I partner and collaborate with you. It gives me very little information. It gives me almost nothing. Like, when I look at these and I look at all of ours, it does not shift or change the way that I interact with you. And so then I'm like, well, okay, maybe it's not for interpersonal, right? Maybe it's just for me. But if it's just for me, my issue with it and most personality tests is that there's also this thought around like, it's just a snapshot and it doesn't give me direction. Right? It has like this fixed component around it, especially MBTI, because like your MBTI is never supposed to change. So it's like, okay, I'm an INFJ. I can never be more than that. Similar to what Corey was stating, that can actually be really dangerous, right? If I say I'm introverted and then I just lean into the introversion, I decide that I can never actually be extroverted. That's just who I am. That's just who I am. We're playing into fixed mindset. We're playing into the idea that that's the only way that I function as a human being. Same with, I decide that I'm always focused on intuition. The fuck is intuition coming from? Why aren't I also thinking about, well, intuition is one component, my internal drive, but how am I also sensing the world around me, right? It's like, it's basically like, this is who you are, get in the box, get comfortable. And I'm like, okay, well, is that all I am and who I will be for the rest of my fucking life? And also this doesn't even help me interact with the people in my life. I got issues with MBTI. I got issues with almost all of these. I think as long as you're just having a good time, it's fine. My favorite one, which Justin, you haven't listed, but I know you also sometimes enjoy this one. I like StrengthsFinder.
Well, StrengthsFinder doesn't claim to be a personality assessment.
I guess it doesn't.
No, it's a diagnostic.
No wonder I like it.
It's a tool, but it's not claiming to describe personality, which is a very specific branch of psychology. Yeah.
Well,
I do like horoscopes because I think they're hilarious.
Two other things with the MBTI specifically, but a lot in general. One, it creates false dichotomies, right? Rikki, you were saying like intuition, right? Again, reading directly from the report. Intuition, you would tend to entrust interrelationships, theories, and future possibilities. Sensing, the opposite, says you notice and trust facts, details, and present realities, as if you have to choose between present realities and future possibilities. That creates a false dichotomy. Like you can simultaneously exist in this current reality and admit reality, recognize it, but then also consider future possibilities and how the current realities, one way or the other, can lead to various future possibilities. It creates a false dichotomy and it oversimplifies who you are as a person, right? But the other big thing, and this is in the coaching circles especially, also therapy, but it's
watching Corey
different.
Get stressed.
Get the claws out, Corey. This man has a hand on his forehead. He is
watching him get
stressed, just getting ready to say it.
Because when I did therapy, psychology shit, we do a lot of assessments as well. Some of them are personality-ish assessments, but they're specifically towards psychopathology and not just like regular personality shit. Those also have a slew of issues. But whether it is therapy or coaching, people as a recipient of the assessment, people love getting a fucking report because they love seeing themselves on paper, right? Especially like in corporate settings and shit. It's like, oh, here's a relic, here's an artifact of a thing we can fucking file away, and like, oh, we paid you to do this. Like we have this thing as proof that, you know, of whatever in the fuck, right? People love getting assessments. The issue is, most of the time, these assessments give you a false sense of insight. They make you think you've developed this supreme insight, like, oh, holy shit, I never thought, like, I see this shit all the time on the interwebs of people, friends I know, or other people, or bigger names. And they're like, oh, I just got this assessment back. I just worked with this coach and they gave me this assessment. And like, oh my God, like, this is my attachment style. I need to do inner child work or some complete fucking Scorpio kind of bullshit. And I will go off for days on inner child work and attachment shit, because it's all the same. It's all a fucking Barnum effect and confirmation bias, every single piece. Now you may say, Corey, that sounds like you have an anxious avoidant attachment style. Well, fuck you, I'm a Scorpio, right? You're saying the same shit. You can literally substitute your Myers-Briggs personality for your Enneagram, for your horoscope, for your Jungian archetype you identify, whatever. If you can do that, it's all bullshit. It's a MacGuffin, like in movie terms. Like, this is the thing that, like, you can substitute it out and it doesn't change the plot. That's all any of it is. In my opinion, if you are an expert and you want to like hit us up and like come on for like a part 2, I would, just like Justin said, I would legitimately love, because I'm not an expert in this, right? The reason I'm not an expert in it is because from day one, I was like, all of this is bullshit. I don't want to become an expert in bullshit. So if you are an expert, I would love for you to come on and like be like, actually, there are a lot of nuances you all do not understand. And these nuances are why it is valid. Even though it may not be scientifically valid, it is anecdotally valid. That's fine. I would love to have that conversation, because I adamantly call bullshit on all of it.
Are those nuances only valid if I pay for like the additional details and also like personalized coaching and a specific facilitator?
And join the Church of Scientology. Yes.
I'm just saying, if in order to leverage it and use this nuance, I need to have someone who's specially trained in this internalized cycle, then I got questions.
To help you get rid of your thetans and because of Mount Lord Xenu or whatever the fuck Scientology. It's all the same. It's all the same shit. That is my spicy point of view.
I think what it comes down to, and you said it really well, which is around confirmation bias. I also think about the conscious and unconscious bias. Like, I'm the one that's filling out the test. I'm the one that's getting the answer. It's one person's example. And also, you might answer those questions how you are, or how you wish you are, or how you think you should be. Like, there's just so much. There's such a lack of rigor in it for me. And so if you want to do it and have fun with it, fuck yes. Totally enjoyable. Like, I love it. If you are leveraging it as a tool and it is who you are as a person, you should be, I feel like you have to be much more cautious around it, because you're hanging out in the tension of bullshit.
Or if you're paying somebody a lot of money to do it.
Oh my God.
Don't waste your fucking money.
Please don't.
Take an internet test. It'll give you enough of the same results. Or just buy a fucking tarot deck for $5 or $10 and just do it yourself. That's fine.
Pull a card, ask a question, pull a card.
Because here's the thing, like with that, a lot of times we know our issues. We know what we're good at. We know what we're not good at. We know where we shine and where we don't. But we get in our own way, because a lot of times we struggle to give ourselves permission to recognize that aspects of ourselves, or we don't give ourselves the environment, the opportunity to actually clearly reflect on who we are and how we show up in the world. All of these tests are a surrogate for that, or a proxy for that. If you yourself just sat down and like radical honesty kind of shit, and like you reflected on like, where do I shine? Where do I struggle? How do I want to show up? These types of things, largely, not exclusively, but largely, you could come up with much better, truer insights for yourself with even like a simple journaling practice.
It depends on the layer of someone's consciousness. I'm going to come back to the question just very briefly. Here's where it is somewhat useful. And again, this isn't disagreeing with everything that you said, Rikki and Corey, but it is saying there early on in your journey of coming to know yourself, I've had some of these assessments point to things that I couldn't have seen for myself because you made this point at the beginning, Corey. I didn't have the language and the mental models for it. And so I do think early on in certain processes, these assessments can start to give us language and point to things that we then get to go, oh, I do recognize that in myself. But the key thing you're pointing to, Corey, is I still am having the power of going, is that true for me? How is that true for me? And what do I want to do with it? Rather than, again, the mistake with these things is, here's my box. I live in this box. And when it really gets nefarious, which I think, Rikki, some of your experience with this at that not yet named, but could be found on her LinkedIn consulting company, is when I start to put other people also in these boxes, right? So where assessments generally go wrong is this is my box of limitations. This is their box of limitations, rather than when they're used at their best is this may be pointing to some patterns of mine that I wish to be more conscious of and start to come into more choice around, do I enjoy being in that pattern or not being in that pattern? And I think that is very much dependent how useful the tool is on the tool and what Rikki and Corey are pointing to us on the person who's deploying the tool to you and how.
Yeah. I love that, Justin. Like what you're describing to me is it's much more, it's a dialogue. It's the beginning of a conversation. And that's where I think it can get interesting. This is not who I am. This is not who you are. This isn't final. This is something to get curious around, to ask questions. Oh, does this feel correct? No? Why not? Does this feel like who I am or who I want to be? Yes? No? Let's play with it. It can be the start of a conversation or a dialogue that you have with yourself and others, but it should not be the end of the game.
So here's a question. It's a two-parter.
Mm.
You all decide what comes up for you. And the answer is maybe not at all. The question is, what diagnostic tools do you like? Personality assessment or otherwise, but what self-referential diagnostic tools, right? So you can own the process. And when you think of using them, what's the process that they live inside of to make sure that it's getting employed effectively? Right. And like the example might be like one thing I do with my clients is I have them take some assessments, but I also have them do a self-guided reflection based on a framework I use. And I have them elicit 360 feedback. So we're getting data from all over the place that then they synthesize. And so it's something like that. Like, how do we use them in a process, a more robust process to get what we want? And the answer might be, and like my question is literally this for your coaching and people who are coming to you. The answer might be, I fucking don't, because I don't believe in it.
I don't. So, but here's the thing.
I want to pause though. Actually, this is kind of striking because Corey has had 12 years plus of psychology education and a coaching training, has gotten trained on a ton of diagnostic tools. And Corey is a very talented psychologist and coach. So just like if somebody's telling you that you need these, just know we have somebody here who's deeply trained at this and very successful. And his thought is, I don't use any of it.
And I can actually, I leave money on the table by not offering assessments, right? A lot of people, they offer assessment as part of like the initial, like a session, or they'll have you do them before your first session, because then you review them in that initial session, right? Like after they've signed and everything. And basically what they do is the coach charges you or overcharges you and then gives you the free quote unquote assessment, login and shit to go take it. You paid them for them to get it and send it to you, right? So I leave money on the table by doing that. My thing is, you're very right, Justin. Like I have had a shit ton of training and assessments, both when I did therapy and then through coaching. And it's always recommended in therapy and coaching to do as many assessments as you can. And the more, insidious reason is because you can bill people more, right? I legitimately, I think that I think that there is a case where people like legitimately think that they're valid and or use them for good intent. But an underlying thing for many, many, many people is that it's just more shit you can bill, and it gives the client a false sense of insight. Okay. That is not a popular opinion, and I accept that. But that is what I personally have seen in many areas. But that being said, I look at it very similarly to how I see manualized interventions. Meaning, again, therapy or coaching, there are many manuals, many workbooks, many things that people will use with you. I firmly, deeply believe if you go to somebody who follows a manualized protocol with you, you're wasting your money. If you can fucking read, buy the book yourself and then go to somebody else who can more fluidly move in between things and guide you. You do not need somebody who exclusively follows a manual. Okay. Similarly to assessments, I think that the best practitioners, regardless of the, again, therapy, coaching, whatever, can, even if they do use assessments, can fluidly interweave assessments throughout rather than front loading a bunch, talking about it once and then moving on. But I also believe that many people who are very fluid don't even need a formal assessment, because let's just pretend, if let's say I've already talked about me being an ENTJ or whatever, so let's pretend I'm your client, right? If you say, oh, Corey, you are an ENTJ, so that means these things work for you and these things don't. That means this is who you are and this is who you are not. You have not taken me into account. You are seeing the numbers and the letters and the descriptions, but you are never seeing the person in front of you. That is why I personally don't fuck with assessments, because regardless of what that assessment says, I am going to, within 10 minutes of being in session with you, throw out the majority of that, because who you are as a person is so complex and so counterintuitive from many of the points that your report is going to shit out for me to read. I'm going to throw most of it out anyway. And even the things that are relevant, I would have gotten not always, but largely a much better insight about you specifically had I just fucking talked to you specifically and not even fuck with the report. There sometimes, especially, Justin, like if you're doing more like working with like companies and things, sometimes companies do like those things or like 360 reports. Like I do not do that, right? Like I much more work with individuals, either entrepreneurs, creators, whoever. I don't typically work as much with the team dynamics for something like a 360 assessment that would include personality and leadership and all this other shit. That I'll let you kind of speak to. But for me, the work that I do, I firmly believe and deeply trust in my process that I have spent 15, 16 years cultivating to get all the insights I need. And more importantly, make sure you feel that you are seen, heard, and understood in a way that doesn't give you a false sense of insight.
Beautiful. Rikki, what wisdom do you have for us around diagnostic tools you like and how to deploy them for success?
I love going after Corey speaks because I'm just like, yes, plus. No, so my point is that I'm in very deep alignment with Corey, which is that I think that specifically when it comes to coaching, if I am living in workbooks and homeworks and frameworks and tests, I'm hiding. I'm scared. I'm literally creating something for us to talk about because I can't get in it with you and I can't really have that conversation, that dialogue. So, sometimes people don't want to work with me because they'll be like, oh, do you have like a framework? Is there going to be a binder of homework that I do? And I'm like, you're going to have homework. Like you're going to have stuff that you're going to work on in between sessions, but I don't know what they're going to be. We don't even know each other yet. We need to get in it. Like I need to be super present with you. That doesn't mean that I don't have a whole host of tools and things that we can pull and leverage when necessary. But ultimately, especially in coaching, oftentimes an overabundance of tools and frameworks is fear that I'm scared to just have a session with a person, and is my personal opinion. Now, again, if you're working in more of a corporate setting, I actually think it's helpful to have some kind of tools so that we can have like a more consistent conversation, right? Like whenever I've done leadership coaching with a collective leadership team, there's going to be similar things that I'll do with all of them because you want to have a connective tissue and thread. That's different. That's because we want to be able to have the same dialogue with everyone. That's still not, we're not going like heavy into it. That being said, I mentioned it already. There's one diagnostic tool that I don't always use. Again, similar, like I don't always use it. It's not necessary for all of my conversations, but one of the ones that often shows up is StrengthsFinder, which is technically not a personality test. I guess it's a diagnostic. And that's actually just usually helpful because it gives language. Like people sometimes are like, they're struggling to talk about where they think they shine. And that can be a nice starting point of the discussion. But it's not, oh, this is who you are now. You are complete. It's literally similar to what Justin does with his clients. It's like, okay, so what resonates? What doesn't? What feels good? What are you mad about? Why are you mad about it? Where does this show up for you in work or in life? And it's a dialogue. It's a conversation starter. It's not this is who you are. This is how I will then treat you. We're not doing a fucking, Adventure Time. You selected A and therefore go to question 4. Fuck that. Like you are so much more robust in this process, and it should change over time. Like one of the things I actually love about StrengthsFinder is it changes. If you took it 2 years ago and then you've been working for 2 years, it's probably going to change. You have adapted and changed, and that alone makes it much more interesting as a conversation starter in the process. So full alignment with Corey. I mean, I think it's one of those things that, also if I can just live in the world of frameworks, if it is just an exam, then that's an online tool that you should be paying much less for. You shouldn't be spending all this time going deep and just getting reports sent back to you. Again, I think they can be fun as a starting point. I think they can be an enjoyable thing when it's necessary or when it feels right in the conversation. But the training that I have done really focused on not hiding behind those types of tools or frameworks. It was really focused on having tons of homework and things like that is oftentimes discomfort in sitting in the shit of it.
Great. What will I say? I'm probably the most assessment favorable of everyone here. But as a yes and to it shouldn't be something that's hiding behind them. And for me, I have really strong views these days on what certain assessments are good for and what they're not good for, and also when and where to turn for them and when and where not to turn for them. So like when I'm coaching, the first thing I do with all my clients is I have an exercise to guide them through to help them understand them actually define their own dominant pattern as a leader and to understand the way of leading that's lost to them. Right. And so like an example of this is somebody may define like, oh, I'm a really assertive leader, but what gets lost is this more soft leadership. These aren't archetypes. They get to self-define it based on a series of prompts. And it really gives them ownership outside of the confines of a quote unquote personality assessment to, again, understand their own dominant patterning and ways of being and operating that are lost as a result. So for me, the first thing I want is for them to self-author how they see themselves. I these days do use Enneagram, which is based on training I had with the Conscious Leadership Group. And what I'll say is pre-Conscious Leadership Group, I thought Enneagram was a total crock of BS. I still think the way most people hold Enneagram, it is a crock of BS. And I'll say that it's totally not scientifically validated. So if you're like a big science hardo, you're not going to like Enneagram. The way it's been held with them, that they taught me about it, which I like, is Enneagram is describing kind of like a dominant set of like biases that you have in your personality. A bias, but like your worldview bias, a set of biased listening filters, a set of biased behavioral and cognitive patterns. And now I spent a year training in this with people in all different types, right? So like I went really deep into it. And the reason why I deploy this with my clients is I want to hear when we type them what really resonates with them in those patterns. And that informs me if those are patterns to look for, and it informs how I show up for them as a coach. right? I'll use a really quick example of why I like it. Like, let's look at Enneagram 8s and Enneagram 7s. Enneagram 8s have a bias in their personality according to the type of, they seek intensity, and that can get them in trouble because sometimes they make intensity where there is none. Whereas Enneagram 7s tend to flee from negative things, and so they actually flee from when things start to get intense and hard. And if I have two different clients who are typed that way and they agree with those assessments, well, as coach, it's useful for me because I know if my Enneagram 8 is treating something as super intense, what they might need from me as coach is to find the play in it, find it more lightly, and I might not want to get wrapped into their intensity. Whereas an Enneagram 7, if they're treating it like nothing's intense, I as coach might want to go and look for where the intensity is that they're avoiding. And I found that really useful when somebody does that for me. Now, the thing to know about Enneagram is don't just go do a personality assessment online. You really need like a trained person to do it. And you need an effective person to, yeah, Rikki's got a little face on there. But you need somebody to help like narrow down the nuance of your type. And you need somebody who holds it as it's not this bucket that you're in, but here's the growth trajectory that's available to you. And so that's important. And then I always include 360 feedback in what I do. And so for me, like those are the pieces of the structure I use now, which is there's self-reflective, there's an assessment to help you kind of like hold a mirror up to yourself and us to quickly get some insight on patterns. And then there's a bunch of 360 feedback to get some data. And then I let people own, okay, based on all of this data now, including an assessment, what do you think your real strengths are? What do you think your real blind spots and growth areas are? The one other assessment I give a shout out to that I do like is DISC for teams that are struggling with interrelational like communication stuff. I find DISC, and you can pretty much just take a good assessment with DISC. I don't feel as much that you need a trained facilitator. Can help give you like a quick shot in the arm of like, oh, I'm a D, so I want things to be short and to the point. That's true. Oh, I'm a C. I want to know all of the details. And so it can be quick for helping people understand, oh, here are my communication preferences and lack of preferences. Again, I don't like using it to put people in a box. I don't like it to select things, but it can help teams really understand where they're misfiring purely based on communication, because one person is expecting and wanting this, and one person is expecting and wanting the other thing.
How do you get your Enneagram? What is it? Do I take a quiz? So far, I was like, I'm with everyone, but I'm like, this one, what the fuck is that? I don't know anything about it. I'm so confused. Do I need to find a tarot card reader and they're going to tell me what it is?
No,
I have a really good tarot card reader.
This is one. Yeah, Corey's going to have feelings about this. The way it was done with me is you take the assessment. The assessment tells you kind of like what types you tend high toward, which if you understand the types, that's also useful because you can go, oh, that and that type does resonate with me. That does resonate with me. Again, this introspective frame kind of thing. But it's helpful to have somebody there to ask you some type of questions beyond the survey, because the survey has 9 types. So you might type high for like 2 or 3 of them and help you come to see and understand and opt in like, oh, that really feels like my dominant pattern. Now, again, you can get lost if the person then like I type highest as an Enneagram 3. If somebody goes, well, now you're just an Enneagram 3 and that defines everything about you. Again, you're kind of lost. It's useful to know, oh, I have some of these tendencies, just like I have tendencies of all of these types, because this is an arbitrary mental schema we as humans have created to be useful. God didn't go and you were born an Enneagram 3. Not how this works. But yeah, it's helpful, Rikki, to have somebody like ask you some questions who's trained to like get like, oh, this really feels like the type that you truly lead with and dominate with.
Interesting. So I could see that as being interesting because it's like you're going to fill out an assessment, but then maybe I have my own biases around even how I answer the questions, or like it's harder to infer. And then you work with someone who asks you questions and kind of like,
so it's like it's a star chart output. It's like, oh, you type really high. Like I typed really high as 1, 3, and 7 or something. And so I then talked to a person and they asked some questions and they said, oh, does this really resonate with you? And I went, oh yeah, it does. And they went, okay.
It sounds like a different language and I love it. You a 1,
if you're
you a
really
6?
interested in it, you and I, we can play together.
We'll talk about it later.
And then I'll define you by that number. Like once
Thank God
Corey revealed
someone
he's an
has
E5,
to.
he's
and then
only
we'll
a
tell
5
Corey
to
what we
now.
are. And then only be referred to as that. Justin 3.
Yeah.
Corey 8.
But again, Enneagram's one that I like, but I would say be cautious. Don't just like run out and go with anyone, because there are ways that it's held that I think are really useful, and there's ways that it's held that I think are really not useful. And Corey holds it all as bullshit.
100%.
Such a surprise.
All right, y'all. Any last comments? We'll decide afterwards if this is 1 or 2 episodes. I'm not sure how I'm going to break it up, but any final comments on Myers-Briggs, personality assessments, diagnostics?
I think that results of any of these can describe you or define you. I think if you allow them to describe you, as in describe aspects of you for languaging purposes, like for a shared language and a starting point for how you conceptualize yourself and how you show up, that is fine. If you use them to define you, as in this is all that I am and all that I can be, you are on a surefire path to failure, however you want to define that.
Let it be a conversation starter for yourself and those that you partner with.
Have fun with it. Use the parts that are useful. Throw away the rest. And don't pay $1 bajillion to anybody for any type of diagnostic. I think that's one thing we all agree with. It's like even me, who's the most diagnostic favorable, plus 1,000, like the coach, there's no frameworks in the coaching. We are going into the open and really getting into the mess of who we are as humans and operating from there. If anybody is using assessments to say, here's your box and now your 1, 2, 3 step algorithm to get your outcome, like Corey said, find their book and read it. Don't pay them X thousand dollars to go there.
It's more work. You know what I mean? Like if you have to do, if I can't just have something spit it out, that's instant gratification. That's what that is, friends. It's that you don't want to do the introspective work. It's that you don't want to do the discomfort, like the deep hanging out in the weeds of it. Mm-hmm. That's why we fucking like these, because it's just like, oh, I fill out some questions and it gives me an answer and it tells me who I am. You're playing small.
Yeah.
Like if
don't let them be a crutch.
No. Let it be something that can be interesting. It can be information, but it's not the end of the conversation.
All right, y'all.
Toodles.